The house stood unassuming on F Street in Sacramento, California. It was a stately Victorian, painted a cheerful shade of pink. Dorothea Puente, a seemingly kindly elderly woman, ran a boarding house within its walls. She was known for her warm smile and generous spirit, always willing to lend an ear or offer a helping hand. Her tenants, often down on their luck or struggling with mental illness, found solace in her care. She provided them with a roof over their heads, home-cooked meals, and a sense of belonging. Dorothea Puente cultivated an image of respectability, seamlessly blending into the fabric of the community. Few suspected the darkness that lurked beneath her pleasant demeanor. Dorothea's boarding house was a sanctuary for the lost and forgotten. She fostered a sense of family amongst her tenants, organizing potluck dinners and game nights. She often ran errands for those who couldn't, cashing their social security checks and managing their finances. Dorothea was seen as a pillar of the neighborhood, someone who looked out for the less fortunate. Her reputation was pristine, her motives seemingly pure. The elderly residents of 1426 F Street placed their trust in Dorothea, unaware of the sinister fate that awaited them. Her demeanor was disarmingly charming, her voice soft and soothing. Dorothea possessed an uncanny ability to gain the trust of the vulnerable, lulling them into a false sense of security. But behind her facade of kindness lay a heart of stone, a chilling indifference to human life. Dorothea Puente preyed on the vulnerable, targeting individuals grappling with mental illness, addiction, or simply the loneliness of old age. She offered them a place to belong, a refuge from the harsh realities of life on the fringes of society. Her promises were alluring comfortable lodgings, nutritious meals, and a watchful eye to ensure their well-being. Many of her tenants arrived at her doorstep with little more than the clothes on their backs and a flicker of hope in their eyes. Dorothea, with her disarming smile and promises of a brighter future, seemed like an answer to their prayers. She understood their vulnerabilities, their desperate need for connection and stability. Dorothea would listen patiently to their woes, offering words of comfort and reassurance. She would share their meals, inquire about their families, and celebrate their small victories. This carefully constructed facade of empathy allowed her to gain their trust, to make them believe that she had their best interests at heart. Little did they know, they were stepping into a carefully woven web of manipulation and deceit. Once she secured their trust, Dorothea began to exert control over their lives. She would encourage them to sign over their social security checks, promising to manage their finances responsibly. She would isolate them from their families and friends, claiming that their loved ones were trying to exploit them. Dorothea thrived on this power, the ability to bend these vulnerable individuals to her will. Their lives, their very identities, slowly became intertwined with hers, trapped within the suffocating confines of her boarding house. The disappearances began subtly, almost unnoticed amidst the transient nature of the boarding house. A tenant would move out, leaving behind few belongings and even fewer questions. Dorothea would offer plausible explanations, weaving tales of new beginnings and fresh starts. Her stories were convincing, her demeanor reassuring. After all, who would suspect a kindly old woman of harming her tenants? But as the months turned into years, a pattern began to emerge, a chilling trend of missing residents. The disappearances were too frequent, the explanations too convenient. Whispers of unease circulated amongst the remaining tenants, a sense of growing suspicion that something wasn't quite right. The once welcoming atmosphere of the boarding house became tinged with fear. A social worker assigned to one of Dorothea's tenants grew increasingly concerned about his whereabouts. The tenant, a man with a history of mental illness, had vanished without a trace. Dorothea's explanation that he had gone to live with relatives rang hollow. The social worker's persistent inquiries, coupled with the mounting number of missing persons reports linked to the boarding house, finally caught the attention of the authorities. The Sacramento Police Department launched an investigation. Their initial inquiries met with practiced ease by Dorothea. The hunt for answers led them to the very heart of the boarding house, to the backyard where Dorothea tended her beloved rose garden. The discovery was as gruesome as it was unexpected. Acting on a hunch, investigators began excavating the backyard of the F Street boarding house. Beneath the carefully tended rose bushes and vibrant flower beds, a horrifying truth lay buried. The decomposing bodies of 7 individuals were unearthed, their remains concealed beneath the soil Dorothea had so meticulously cultivated. The idyllic facade of the boarding house was shattered, replaced by the chilling reality of multiple murders. The news of the grisly discovery sent shockwaves through Sacramento. Dorothea Puente, the kindly old woman who had seamlessly integrated herself into the community, was unmasked as a cold-blooded killer. The house on F Street, once a haven for the vulnerable, was now a crime scene. The stench of death, previously masked by baking cookies and floral air fresheners, now permeated every inch of the property. The investigation intensified, revealing a methodical and calculated killer. Dorothea had drugged her victims, often with over-the-counter sleeping pills or sedatives mixed into their food or drinks. Once they were incapacitated, she would suffocate them or strangle them, disposing of their bodies in the backyard. Her motive, investigators would later conclude, was greed. Dorothea was cashing her victims' social security checks, amassing a small fortune from their deaths. The discovery of the bodies in her backyard shattered the illusion of the kindly boarding house owner, revealing the chilling reality of a cold-blooded killer hiding in plain sight. The victims of Dorothea Puente were, for the most part, forgotten souls living on the fringes of society. Many struggled with mental illness, battled addiction, or simply sought refuge from the loneliness of old age. They arrived at her doorstep seeking solace, a safe haven from the storms of life. Instead, they found their final resting place in Dorothea's backyard. Ruth Monroe, 61, a retired waitress, was known for her kind heart and gentle nature. Benjamin Fink, 55, a former accountant, had fallen on hard times after a battle with alcoholism. Dorothy Miller, 64, a retired librarian, was a lover of books and classical music. Leona Roberts, 61, a former nurse, had dedicated her life to caring for others. James Gallup, 62, a retired construction worker, enjoyed spending his days fishing and tinkering in his workshop. Vera Faye Martin, 64, a former seamstress, was known for her impeccable sense of style and her love of vintage clothing. Alberto Montoya, 51, a drifter with a troubled past, was struggling to get back on his feet. These were just a few of the souls lost to Dorothea's greed and depravity. They were mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters. Their lives, though often marginalized by society, held value and meaning. Dorothea, in her callous pursuit of profit, stripped them of their dignity and robbed them of their futures. Their stories, though tragically cut short, serve as a haunting reminder of the vulnerability of the human spirit and the devastating consequences of unchecked greed. Dorothea Puente's history was as meticulously constructed as the facade she presented to the world. Beneath the veneer of respectability lay a past riddled with deceit, manipulation, and criminal activity. Her crimes, spanning decades, painted a chilling portrait of a woman driven by an insatiable thirst for wealth and power. Her first brush with the law came in the 1950s when she was convicted of forging checks. This early foray into criminal activity hinted at a cunning and calculated mind. In the 1960s, she served time for running a brothel, further solidifying her reputation as a cunning manipulator. Dorothea's ability to evade detection, to seamlessly blend into different social circles, allowed her to continue her criminal enterprises unchecked. Her crimes escalated in the 1970s with convictions for theft and drugging elderly men she met in bars. This pattern of preying on the elderly, particularly men, would become a chilling hallmark of her later crimes. By the time she settled in Sacramento and opened her boarding house, Dorothea Puente was a seasoned criminal. Her past was a chilling foreshadowing of the horrors to come. The house on F Street, far from being a haven, became a hunting ground where Dorothea could operate with impunity, her true nature concealed behind a veil of kindness and respectability.